These two couples thought a wife swap would spice up their marriages. But what began as fantasy quickly spiraled into obsession. Boundaries shattered. Desire turned dangerous. And before long, 34-year-old Jennifer Johnson was dead, killed by a man who confused lust with love. As the detectives pulled the night apart, the truth was darker and uglier than anyone imagined. One warm evening, police received a frantic 911 call from a neighbor.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
I'm not sure.
Okay, what's going on?
I'm not sure.
And that was when everything had turned into a nightmare. Jennifer Johnson, 34, had been home alone while her husband Mark was away on a work trip. At first, no one suspected that anything unusual was going on. But there was a dark secret which shook the whole town. When Jennifer stopped responding to friends' texts and calls later that evening, concern began to grow. Hours turned into the next morning, and still no word from her. The usually social and attentive Jennifer had gone silent. By late morning, a family friend drove by the Johnson home and noticed something odd. The blinds were drawn. Jennifer's car was still in the driveway, but the house seemed strangely still. The friend knocked on the door several times, but there was no answer. Finding something wrong, they called Jennifer's sister, who quickly phoned local authorities to request a welfare check. When officers arrived, they found the house locked up tight. The front porch light, oddly, was still on. They went around the whole area and found pry marks on the back door as if someone had tried to force their way in or made it look that way. With great concern and urgency, they entered the home. And this is when they found things that were much worse than what one could imagine. When they got inside, it was a huge mess. The living room showed clear signs of a struggle. There was an overturned lamp, cushions were scattered across the floor, and there were faint smears of what looked like blood along the hallway wall. As the officers pushed deeper into the house, the air grew heavy with tension. Then, inside the master bedroom, they found something that left them frozen. They found her. They found Jennifer Johnson. She was lying across the carpet, and her body was cold and lifeless. She had been stabbed multiple times. This brutal nature of the attack leaves no question about intent. Blood stained the bedding and all over the floor beside her, and nearby, the cops found something even more strange. They found a kitchen knife. It was wiped in a hurry, but still had traces of blood, and it was left resting in the sink. This was not just a normal killing case. It was something more, something unusual. Detectives were immediately called in. The crime scene unit carefully documented every detail, including the location of the body, the track of the blood spatters, the disturbed furniture, and the staged signs of a forced entry at the back door. But what struck investigators most was the personal nature of the attack. This was not a random burglary gone wrong. This was rage, obsession, and betrayal laid bare in blood. Neighbors quickly started sharing what they had seen the night before. One woman across the street reported noticing a dark sedan, which she did not recognize, parked in front of the Johnson home. Another said that she heard muffled shouting around 9 p.m., followed by what sounded like a thud. At the time, she didn't bother about it, and thought of it as just another marital argument, unaware that Jennifer's life was being violently taken only yards away. As officers worked the scene, Jennifer's husband, Mark, was notified. Still out of town, he was shocked by the news. His grief was filled with confusion. Who would want to harm his wife? But as detectives dug deeper, whispers began to surface. Friends reported that Jennifer had recently ended a controversial wife swap arrangement with another couple, Daniel and Linda Garner. And in the weeks after that, Daniel had not taken the rejection well. Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. The obsessive texts, the late-night calls, the uninvited drop-ins Jennifer had mentioned to her friends, they all pointed in one chilling direction. Jennifer's killer was likely not a stranger, but someone she knew all too well. The discovery of Jennifer Johnson's body turned Pine Hill upside down. What started as a welfare check quickly turned into one of the most disturbing murder cases the town had ever seen. Behind the closed doors of a seemingly ordinary suburban home, a twisted secret had turned into violence. And with Jennifer gone, detectives now faced a critical question. Was this simply a crime of passion, or the deadly consequence of a fantasy gone horribly wrong? There were too many clues that could not be hidden. It was all way too shocking to everyone around. From the moment detectives entered Jennifer Johnson's blood-stained bedroom, one thing was clear. This was not the work of a random intruder. The scene was too intimate, too violent, too personal. Whoever killed Jennifer had a connection to her, and possibly a motive rooted in obsession. The first significant clue came from the so-called forced entry at the back door. At first glance, the pry marks showed something like a break-in, but crime scene investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies. The damage was superficial. It was more like it had been staged after the fact. No footprints, no mud, no sign of a burglar turning the home upside down. Detectives concluded that the intruder had been let inside willingly or already had access. Then came in the most chilling evidence: the knife. It was found in the sink, partially wiped, and it belonged to the Johnson household. That meant the killer did not bring a weapon. They simply grabbed one of Jennifer's. This pointed to a crime of opportunity, not a pre-planned burglary. But it also showed that Jennifer likely knew her attacker, letting her guard down just long enough for violence to happen. There was another piece of a clue that took the case to a whole new level. It was the phone records that uncovered another chilling layer. In the weeks before her death, Jennifer's phone was filled with messages from Daniel Garner. Some were pleading, while others were angry. One in particular read, "Don't shut me out." You can't just end this. Investigators noted the tone of desperation and fixation, which are signs that Daniel was twisting around from infatuation into obsession. Neighbors also added more weight to the case. Neighbors' reports were enough to match the theory. Many had noticed Daniel's car parked outside the Johnson home at odd hours. One even recalled seeing him the night of the murder, pacing near the driveway. Another neighbor admitted that she often overheard arguments between Jennifer and a man who did not sound like her husband. These testimonies aligned with the mounting doubt that Daniel had crossed a dangerous line. But then, there was an even more damning evidence which turned the whole case and theories. It even shook the detectives. Perhaps the coldest evidence did not come from forensics or neighbors. It came from inside Daniel's own marriage. When detectives questioned his wife, Linda Garner, cracks began to show in her story. It didn't add up. At first, she denied knowing anything about the death. But under a lot of pressure, she confessed to a shocking role. She had helped clean up after Jennifer was killed. Linda described how Daniel came home covered in blood, panicked and incoherent. He begged her for help. Out of fear or loyalty, she agreed to wash his clothes and dispose of the incriminating items. Linda's testimony showed a clear picture of the hours after Jennifer's death. Daniel had rushed into the Johnson home after Jennifer told him their arrangement was over. His obsession turned into rage, and in the heat of the confrontation, he stabbed her repeatedly. When the reality of what he had done sank in, he turned to his wife to cover his tracks. There was more evidence found, and it showed the chilling motive of the crime that happened. Investigators also pieced together financial and digital evidence. Search history on Daniel's laptop revealed late-night searches about how long DNA lasts on clothing and staging a burglary scene. The cameras had a story to tell. Surveillance cameras from nearby intersections placed Daniel's car on the route to Jennifer's house the night she was killed. Together, these findings tightened the net around him. Theories came up within the investigative team. The strongest one pointed to Daniel's unchecked obsession as the motive. What started as a consensual arrangement between two couples had grown when Jennifer tried to pull away. For Daniel, rejection was unbearable. He blurred the lines between fantasy and reality until he convinced himself that Jennifer belonged to him. When she refused, his obsession erupted in violence. He turned crueler than he could ever be. Some detectives considered whether Linda might have played a more active role, doubting that jealousy could have driven her to participate in the crime itself. But forensic evidence did not place her inside the Johnson home during the attack. Her guilt lay in the cover-up, not the killing. By the time all the clues were assembled, the narrative was chillingly clear. Jennifer Johnson had become the victim of an obsession she wanted no part of. The wife swap arrangement that was supposed to be consensual had given Daniel Garner a dangerous foothold in her life. And when she tried to shut the door on him, he forced it open with fatal consequences. The clues and theories all pointed in one direction, and the evidence against Daniel Garner was too much. But the story was far from over. The case would soon head to court. Where the brutal details of obsession, betrayal, and death would finally be laid bare. The trial of Daniel Garner was not just about a random crime, but rather it was about obsession, betrayal, and the unraveling of two families bound by a dangerous arrangement. The courtroom saw a huge battle that brought chills to everyone around there. From the very beginning, prosecutors made it clear that this was not a case of temporary madness or a crime of passion. It was a well-planned act, mixed and fueled by fixation and a refusal to let go. Inside the Pine Hill Courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. The gallery was filled with family members, journalists, and townspeople who still could not believe that a respected local man, a husband and father, could commit such a brutal act. On one side sat Mark Johnson, widowed and visibly broken, holding on to photographs of Jennifer. On the other side sat Linda Garner, waiting for her own trial for her role in the cover-up. She could not even look anyone in the eye. Her eyes were often fixed on the floor to avoid the stares of the community. The prosecution wasted no time presenting the narrative they had pieced together. They described Daniel Garner as a man who had willingly entered into a wife swap arrangement, only to become dangerously attached to Jennifer Johnson. When Jennifer attempted to end the relationship, they argued, Daniel's obsession tipped into rage. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was premeditated, planned, and cold-blooded. Key evidence was presented to the jury. This made things even stronger. Jennifer's phone records showed dozens of unanswered texts from Daniel, changing from pleading messages to menacing demands. A forensic expert testified about the staged break-in, explaining how the pry marks on the back door were shallow and inconsistent with forced entry. Surveillance footage placed Daniel's car near the Johnson home on the night of the murder. And then came the most devastating piece of evidence: Linda Garner's confession. Linda took the stand under a plea agreement. Her testimony was raw, sometimes trembling, but clear. She told the court how Daniel returned home that night, covered in blood, rambling about how Jennifer wouldn't listen. Linda admitted that she helped dispose of his clothes and clean up traces of evidence, but insisted she had no part in the killing itself. Her words showed Daniel not only as a killer, but as a man willing to drag his own wife as a result of his crime. The defense attempted to spin another story. Daniel's attorneys argued that he had been emotionally manipulated, that the arrangement did not have proper boundaries, and that it created unbearable psychological pressure. They showed that the stabbing was not planned, but rather an impulsive, heat-of-the-moment act when Jennifer rejected him. To everyone's surprise, the defense took a turn with Linda. They tried to downplay Linda's testimony, claiming that she exaggerated to save herself from harsher punishment. But the jury was unmoved. To everyone in the courtroom, it was a whole drama that brought nothing but shock and devastation. The massive forensic and digital evidence pointed directly to Daniel. His late-night searches about staging crimes, his presence near Jennifer's house, the knife from her own kitchen, all of it spoke to planning and intent. Prosecutors hammered this point again and again. Jennifer Johnson died because Daniel Garner could not accept rejection. After weeks of testimony and arguments, the trial reached its climax. The verdict was more than what one could imagine. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, though few were surprised. The judge sentenced Daniel to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the sentence was read, Daniel showed little emotion, as if he already knew this outcome. Some described him as calm, others as cold. Mark Johnson wept openly, while members of Jennifer's family held on to one another in grief. For them, the verdict was justice, but it could never undo the loss of a mother, a wife, and a beloved member of their community. So what happened to Linda Garner? As for Linda Garner, her cooperation had spared her from the same fate. She later pleaded guilty to charges of accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. Her 15-year sentence ensured that she would one day walk free, though she would forever carry the stigma of having helped in one of Pine Hill's most shocking crimes. The trial of Daniel Garner made the story more than just a tabloid tragedy. It became a grim reminder of how fantasies, once unleashed, can spiral into deadly realities. Jennifer never knew that the man she once welcomed into her home would become the very person who ended her life.